Hello everyone, welcome to chapter 3 or module 3, verbal communication. So I'm sure within this module you've taken a look at Robert's Rules of Order. It can be a little challenging to understand the complexity of Robert's Rules, but it's there for a reason, and it has so much complexity because the goal of Robert's Rules is to follow parliamentary type precedent. So there's a process to our changes in a meeting or how a meeting functions in general. And it's really important, I think, to know the gist of Robert's Rules so you're able to kind of follow a meeting and how it works. The website that's included that talks about Robert's Rules is helpful, and then I also posted a video which I think that you will find most helpful in regards to how Robert's Rules work. So take a look at those videos, and you can put that in your discussion post for sure, but that's a really, I think, a helpful thing overall. So this chapter is going to talk a little bit about verbal communication. So we won't go through the outline, but verbal communication, of course, comes in a lot of different components. The first component, of course, is listening. So there are 5 components of listening. As you're aware, they're just not all. Communication is not just speaking or writing. Listening is also a part of communication, and it includes hearing, interpreting, retaining, and recalling. So you hear a lot of people say, you're not retaining or recalling what I say. You're not remembering what I say. Part of listening is listening with the intent to understand and not just listening with the intent to hear someone out. So there are barriers to listening. Of course, there can be physical barriers, and they also can be, distractions or noise-based barriers out there. Another barrier that people often forget about is if you have an opinion or thought process about someone before you hear someone out. A lot of times this can be along the lines of political thinking. That can play into a negative role in regards to listening. And, really not listening or not being interested in what is being said can also play a barrier into listening. So maybe you're, watching the news one day and you're like, man, this is really not interesting. So you kind of blot out everything that's being said and you're doing your own thing. So you wouldn't be listening with the intent to understand at that point, and it can play a negative impact in your recall and retaining process. So in order to focus on the message, you first want to make sure you don't blame the speaker, and then on top of that, when you talk about blame, you want to make sure that you give them the responsibility of your time, and you think about a little bit what they're saying, and you follow along, even if they can be a little bit dull or boring at times. Understand the responsibility to interpret the message that they're giving out. That's key. Like, what are they really talking about in the scope of things, and make sure that you understand, even though if you don't really agree with the speaker, try to find something positive that you can learn about their message. Same thing when it comes to classes. You might not enjoy one class as much as the other, but try to get as much out of it as you can, because you're talking to an expert in the field, and if you can get a grain of information from them, you'll get more out of the process. A part of listening is empathy and sympathy. Empathy is when you feel what another person is feeling, so that's really the focal point of extreme listening or positive listening. Empathy, on the other hand, is a lot different. It's just being aware of another person's feelings and not feeling their feelings per se, but there's a lot of differences between the two, empathy and sympathy. So some filters to control noise, of course. On top of that, you need to make sure that you have the right environment to be successful in your listening process. So, use earplugs when there's noisy machinery is one example, or turn the TV off or down if you're at home. Some people have a tough time with this, to be upfront and honest. A lot of people can't resist talking, man. They need to talk about everything all the time. I'm talking about people who have trouble listening, so they talk more than they listen. Make sure you are aware of that. If you struggle with, wanting to say more than sometimes what is needed, practice that in the art of your communication skills, but really pay heed to, people when they're talking and listen, and try not to interrupt. A lot of people have taught me in the period of my leadership career is to be the last one to speak in the room. And usually if you're the last person to speak in the room, you did a good job of listening to others, because most people want to come out and talk first, and you also respected them and their time. Another thing you want to do is make sure there's no preconception. So if you walk into a room and you're hearing someone out in regards to their talking process, or you're talking to them over media like phone or text. Make sure you don't have any bias there to, negatively influence your perspective of who they might be or who they, might want in regard to your voice or their perspective or your perspective in general. So what I'm trying to say is make sure you find the positive in the conversation other than just having a negative thought process before you even get into the conversation. Hear people out. Body language is a big thing. I would say this is one of the most important aspects of communication. Make sure you sit facing the speaker. Make sure you nod when you're listening. You take notes. Don't cross your arms because that makes you feel like you're closed off in regards to listening or communication process. Be open. Be willing to hear people out, and be the person in class that sits in the front. Don't be the person in class that sits in the very back, doesn't pay attention, is always on their phone, does the things that wouldn't earn you PPS points, for example. So do the things that make you successful in the long run, and usually the people that find the most success are the ones that try the hardest. And usually if you're trying hard, you're sitting up front and you're facing the speaker and you're doing the best you can to learn. All right, we'll skip that and we'll skip the questions in general. So this is a little bit, you can go through this and just going back up to the questions. It really talks about closed or open answers in regards to open answer is what brings you in today, and then a closed question or open question. Closed question would be, did you drive here today? And the answer would be, of course, yes or no. And that would be a closed answered question. So what you want to do when you're speaking to patients and coming at this from a leadership perspective, I usually work with providers more than I do with patients, of course. You want to come at things with an open-ended question mantra because you want to get people to start talking. There can be a point in time, especially on the provider side of things, that you need more closed conversations because you want it to end early. And I think in general, sometimes things go a little bit longer than planned. But take a look at these questions when you have time. It's just interesting to null through them and see what you think in regards to the information in here about answering or asking questions. That is really it for this chapter. There wasn't a lot in here. The main thing that I want you to concentrate on is Robert Rules, and I'm going to head into that in just a second. Oh, the fun of Robert's Rules of Order. This is through just a National Society of Professional Surveyors. So this is a summary version, of course. I want you to really read through Robert's Rules so you understand it. It's really, honestly, at times hard for me to explain Robert's Rules of Order, and I find it a lot better if someone else explains it for me, because someone that deals with Robert's Rules all the time has a better understanding of how the process works. And the good thing that I find myself doing often, especially when I go to things like a board meeting or a city council meeting, I find myself reading over the packet because it goes over the parliamentary procedure to the process, which is the Robert's Rules of Order. And those rules consist of point of privilege, parliamentary inquiry, point of information, all that type of stuff that can really be played into this information here. So I want you to read over it, make sure you understand it, and then talk about it in that discussion post. And I'm going to pull that up really quickly. Look at Robert's Rules, and this view is going to look a little bit different than your view, of course, because it's an instructor view. But when you're doing the discussion post, really dive into what you thought was unique about Robert's Rules of Order, and talk about how their challenges and how the challenges meet kind of the rules, and how Robert's Rules can help a procedure or a meeting go smoother. I can tell you one thing. Without Robert's Rules, some meetings would be a disaster. I've witnessed those meetings, and you don't want to be a part of them because it's a lot more effective when there's a talking sequence and people are actually, a part of a process rather than just kind of spinning on the wall and hoping things happen the way you want them to. That usually is not a positive implementation process for any meeting whatsoever. There are a lot of really successful groups that use this Robert Rules of Order, and I think you'll find more benefit watching the videos as we talked about earlier. One of the positive things about doing online learning and I'm hoping you're getting a lot out of it, is to be able to learn as you go. And you have due dates, of course, but you're able to rewind and listen to this video again. You're able to look over the videos that I put in the module each week. Take your time, look over as much as you can. Always reach out if you have any questions. I've already had people reach out with wanting to set up meetings to talk about certain things. I'm more than happy to do that. Please let me know if that's something that you need, and I'm happy to be there for you. Contact me anytime. I appreciate all your work the last few weeks and look forward to the rest of the semester.